Greetings and welcome to the Dr. J Vlog series. It is Monday, July 21st, 2025, and on Mondays we talk about mathematics and statistics. So be honest, did you miss me? What? No, the theme this week is honesty, and so we're going to deal with this from a variety of different perspectives as I talked about yesterday. So today, for the mathematics and statistics part of this vlog, we're going to look at some of the data. Okay, so let me start with a simple question then. Are you a liar? That's like asking somebody, are you a terrorist? The default response, of course, is no, of course not. Many people, in fact, would take offense at the very question. So, but have you ever lied? Sure, almost certainly. In fact, I'd be shocked if you'd never lied. You might even hear comments at the other end of the spectrum. Well, sure, everybody lies, at least sometimes. So, do you still lie? As an adult, do you still lie occasionally? And about how often do you lie? And about what exactly do you lie? So many academic scholars argue that lying is actually quite the frequent event. Both life experiences and anecdotal evidence encourage the acceptance of the proposition. In fact, think about it in everyday terms. From Santa Claus to inflated resumes to the diet supplements that supposedly make you thin without exercising, to simply whether or not we love someone when we say, I love you. All of these things and countless others, there's a whole catalog of personal and not so personal lies that we might tell from time to time. But on the other hand, just the fact that there is such diversity in terms of the types of lies that might be told, that some of us might tell, that doesn't mean necessarily then that lying is ubiquitous, does it? Or even that pervasive. In fact, it is pervasive. The best studies that I've seen, and this goes back several years for me. In fact, I bought a book some years ago, The Day That America Told the Truth, which reported on national surveys on a wide range of different issues to give us a sense of the sort of population dynamics or the population trends and so forth. But at the opposite end of the spectrum, it just so happens that people on a fairly regular basis do seem to lie. So the best research in the US, a diary panel study, found that on average, Americans tell about 1 to 2 lies each day. And then a 2010 follow-up study provided large-scale validation of the original research and found that people in the US told on average 1.65 lies per day. And then in the United Kingdom, the number is actually slightly higher, according to a recent study, or roughly about 2 lies per day. So, and then although the frequency of lies above 5 lies per day is generally different in the UK, or it's measured differently in the UK and the US studies, roughly 94% in the US sample and 92% 94% in the UK sample, 92% in the US sample told somewhere between 0 and 5 lies daily. But again, the averages are closer to around 2 per day. But then there's this skew in the data. That is, on any given day, based on self-report evidence, the majority of the adults tell few or no lies. But then there's this small subset who tell the majority of the lies. No, it's not the 20-80 rule. Most notably, the research has found that about 5% of all subjects accounted for more than 50% of all lies told. And then a recent study in the UK as well identified that these more prolific liars, as they're called, so think of prolific liars, are the ones who lie regularly. The prolific liars are in some respects a distinct population that can be statistically separated from the everyday liars like you and me. Okay, so in the UK study, the common or everyday liar would tell typically 1 little white lie daily, and then about 1 bigger lie each week on average. And most people, by the way, they found in the general population, tended to approve of the lie that they told, especially if it's to avoid hurting someone else's feelings. Everyday liars don't generally abstain from lying, perhaps because they've learned that you need to sort of tell these white lies, if you will, because the negative effects of being too honest might sort of dissuade that. Or we learn that through earliest stages of socialization and that sort of thing. I'll get into the behavioral dynamics later in the week. But really the key point here is that in contrast, the prolific liars tell almost 3 big lies on average per day, in addition to about a half a dozen smaller white lies. So the prolific liars then are also much more likely to approve of lying, to protect secrets, to avoid giving in to the whims of children, and for a variety of other reasons. And so other of their big lies, or anybody's big lies, are included in this category as whether they love their partner or not. That's considered a big one. Not being honest about where they've been, hiding something in that regard. Calling in sick when they're perfectly fine. That's a big lie. Saying you haven't had too much to drink, when in fact you have had too much to drink. How much time you've been spending at work or on something, on a given project. Even just being too busy to take a call. And then telling someone they look really good when they don't look so good. So in other words, these are manipulative lies, behaviors that are aimed at securing or leveraging the situation to one's own advantage, or perhaps trying to leverage a resource on one's behalf, including trying to obtain someone's affections. So yeah, we can actually lie, obviously, in order to try to seek someone else's affection, and many other things, of course. Whereas most everyday liars say they've reduced the lying and the amount of lying that they've experienced in life, especially since since their childhoods, and that as adults, they generally speak to generationally, at least over the decades, how they start to lie less and less in time. The thing is that the prolific liars continue their lying behaviors, their patterns, right into adulthood. And they don't seem to slow down in many instances. So their dishonesty then permeates everything from their business situations to their personal relationships. So at work, for example, the research shows that the prolific liars are 4 times more likely than the general population, or the rest of the population, to have been reprimanded for lying, and almost nine times more likely to have been fired for dishonest behavior. And then prolific liars are also 4 times more likely to report losing a partner because of their lying habits. And then finally, another study more recently looked at the deception as it's used in new media forms. So for example, like in text messaging, with a focus on how often people lie and about what issues and to whom. And here again, the researchers found that the majority of participants did in fact practice some forms of deception in their text messaging. However, outright lying was a relatively infrequent occurrence for the majority of participants, but there were still, again, this small number of prolific liars who told a disproportionately large number of lies using the medium. So overall, we don't have absolute or really precise figures in terms of the population demographics and the statistics about who's doing all the lying. It does seem that the vast majority of people, at least in the US and the UK, where I've been able to find some good research, tell about 1 to 2 lies per day. And generally, it's viewed as acceptable in most of these contexts. So they're considered the white lies, the little lies that sort of, grease the social machinery, if you will. And then on the other hand, at the same time, the estimates suggest as well that about roughly 10 to 12% of people, again, in both the US and the UK, tell roughly at least 5 or 6 white lies on a daily basis. And then they're also more inclined to tell the big lies as well. And so amongst the 10 to 12% of habitual liars, these are folks who cannot seem to really maintain that sense of honesty and integrity on a consistent basis, day in, day out. So it's become their default setting, if you will. And we sometimes describe these kinds of people as pathological liars. That's a term you've probably used yourself at some point or heard. And this highlights the almost disease-like nature of lying. But bear in mind, we do not classify lying as a mental disorder. It's not in the DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. So that's kind of the Bible the DSM-5. And so their behavior, nonetheless, is characterized by persistent, compulsive lying that significantly impairs social, occupational, and other forms of functioning. So these are the people that, of course, you have to be especially careful around, whether in your personal or your professional life, because they're the ones that can do significant damage in a variety of contexts and relationships. The important takeaway, though, is that most people will, in fact, tell the occasional small lie or white lie, as I say, to kind of grease the wheels of the social machinery, trying to protect people's feelings and that sort of thing. And the vast majority of these cases, then the lies that are told are certainly not intended to be malicious. It generally starts in early childhood as children start to test out different strategies to avoid getting in trouble or getting punished and to gain social acceptance. But most of us eventually grow out of the habits of telling at least the bigger lies, even though, again, at least 1 in 10 continue to tell the bigger lies, and that becomes part of their MO in adulthood. So again, the good news is that, looking at the other side, by the way, if you just look at attitudinal or opinion surveys, the vast majority of folks, as you would probably expect, claim to value honesty. Again, it depends on the study and the national survey in question, but generally 90 to 95% of the population values or states that they value honesty as a core, tenet or virtue that they adhere to or try to adhere to. But again, remember that having the virtue or espousing honesty as a value that you hold near and dear, that's not the same thing as always acting in accordance with that value, including whether you choose to lie or not under different circumstances. And there's some additional nuances to this whole business of truth-telling that I've ignored to this point, or honesty issues in general, that I'm going to do a deeper dive in later in the week. So I'll introduce these later. But for now, I just wanted to give you a little bit of background, some statistical information, and so on. And then in tomorrow's vlog, we're going to actually have fun again with the arts and the music and the arts, and we're going to be looking at songs that deal thematically with honesty. And I'll create another top 10 Dr. J list of faves in this regard. In the meantime, may you and yours continue to create peace in your lives, nurture love in your hearts, and dole out hugs in abundance. We'll see you soon.